forum / conversation between myself and the panelists here. Okay? We're going to essentially discuss what these two terms mean. So political empowerment and grassroots activism. And Richard here is also going to explain to you guys how these two concepts work in real life and what CASE does as an organization in New York.
And I will be here to share my experiences as working as both as an intern and as a staff member at CASE, hoping that you guys will learn something new or something important before you leave from this event.
So a little background about me. I graduated Binghamton in 2010. I went to Hofstra University for law school. I practiced a little bit, did some civil litigation here, some matrimonial, did a little landlord-tenant, and some other odd jobs here and there because I am ambitious and I like to do everything. But I've also dedicated a lot of my time to volunteering, whether it be churches or nonprofit organizations or just, community things overall. And an opportunity opened up at Korean American Civic Empowerment for me to, work as a staff attorney. And as of this year, I started working as the executive director. And I kind of want to get to that, like Korean American Civic Empowerment. We started in 1996. And this was after, I want to say, if anyone remembers the Rodney King decision, the ensuing civil unrest that happened afterwards in 1992. And, America just having to face itself with, where are we as a society in treating the marginalized, in terms of our criminal justice system, in terms of how we are policing our communities, how immigrant communities are, for lack of a better word, assimilating into American society, right? And these are the kinds of questions that a lot of Korean Americans all across the country had to struggle with and figure out their American identity in. So this organization particularly started, its original name was Korean American Voters Council, right? So it's trying to allow people, as they're naturalizing as to American citizens, it doesn't mean that you're just a citizen, you do nothing. No, there are some obligations you have as responsible citizens. One of them is to register to vote and to actually show up to the polls and vote for the people that are going to be representing your communities. But it doesn't just stop there. You need to keep your electeds accountable, right? So that's kind of what KAVC began as, allowing people to know how to register to vote, what the importance of why they need to, meeting their electeds, knowing who they are, right? Not just their names, but their faces and who they are, going up to their offices. We have town hall meetings every year now. And it was a long process. We've been doing this for 27 years, and we're going to keep doing this for a very, very long time. But before I continue to ramble off here, I just want to talk about our mission statement. So our mission statement is very simple. It's to empower the Korean American community by promoting civic participation. Very simple, but it's broad enough for us to be able to tackle many different types of things that as responsible citizens we need to be doing. So our goals are to empower the Korean American community to become one of the most responsible and respected members of American society. That's a high bar, but it's not impossible. It's definitely aspirational and something that we can achieve. So for that goal, we conduct joint and cooperative civic actions among Korean Americans to advocate for voting rights for Korean Americans in the greater New York area. We educate and cultivate future community leaders. We serve as a central coordination and resource body to address community concerns and interests. And I'm just going to paraphrase all the stuff here because this is going to bore everybody, right? So, essentially, we have a long storied history in this organization. I just want to briefly go over some of the stuff that CASE has been able to do over the past 27 years. If I list everything now, we're going to be sitting here for a good 30 minutes, so let me just go through the bullet points. Right, so the U.S. Census Bureau, they've been helping out with that since in 2000, 2010, and 2020. Right, so that census happens every 10 years. It's super important because it affects our redistricting. It affects a lot of things that we take for granted. It's not just counting numbers. It's about figuring out how to distribute the different, the regions, the districts, and all that other stuff, because that affects us at the very local level, right? We helped with campaigning for Korean language access for elections in New York and New Jersey. the concept of having voter registration forms in another language other than English was a pretty foreign concept, like go back 30 years, right? There were no Korean versions of voter registration forms. And if you've never seen one before, we have a bunch of voter registration forms here today. So if you are an eligible voter, right, above 18, U.S. citizen, been a resident, and all the other requirements, but you haven't registered to vote yet, I urge you, please register today. We have it here, we have it up there, we got pens. You can do it online too. But essentially, it's super, super important to register to vote. And providing that kind of access is the type of activism that we began with. Other types is bringing awareness to the comfort women, and the ordeals that they went through during World War II. Right? It's not just localized to South Korea. Other countries experience this kind of issue too. Going back to the voter stuff, we operate a voter hotline for New York and New Jersey during the election season. So we have a primary that's coming up, and we have a general every year in November. And we have a voter hotline because that's there for people with, again, Korean language access. You show up to your election site, and someone might be giving them a hard time. They'll be like, I need to see your ID, or I need to do this. But there might not be somebody that has, there might not be a worker there that speaks Korean, right, or provides that kind of language service access. So instead of them wondering what am I supposed to do, we at the back of every single one of these, we have a hotline number here that they can call, and somebody, usually a volunteer lawyer that's with us, will answer the call and help them, talk them through what they need to be doing. And speaking of lawyers, we have a legal task force, and we've also helped incubate other nonprofit organizations, right, to help them get them off their feet so that they can start doing the things that their mission, calls them to do, but with a little help. It's always hard when you start out. So I also kind of just want to go over some upcoming events and activities. So on May 5th, we're having a NHPI Heritage Month mixer at our office. So everyone here is invited. Just RSVP so you just know how much food to prepare. More information. I put a bunch of those little things in the back so you can take a look more about them. There are QR codes everywhere, so you can look into it. We have a Korean American Collegiate Leadership Conference. It's going to be an all-day thing here in Manhattan at the Met Church. So if you're curious about that, you're Korean American, and you're interested in that kind of program, talk to me. There's more information over there too. May 31st, we're doing our annual golf fundraiser events. Right? If you like playing golf and you want to come join us at a golf country club, you have to pay. There's an entry fee, but the money goes towards funding activities like this and more. So it's for a good cause. You'll have a blast. It's a fun day. This is May 31st. So you guys are done with final exams. And it's right before starting your summer jobs. So it's like a perfect time to blow off that steam. Other things that we do is like the high school internship program. G1 has been through that program both as a student and as a coordinator, right? So this is super, super important because, like in New York City, I don't know if anyone here has been through the public school system here in New York City, but they don't really teach Asian American history. They kind of just started the pilot recently, and only some schools that have a high population of Asian Americans, their PTA was strong enough to have them teach something, right? Maybe like a language class, but that's about it. We took the initiative over 2 decades, not decades, about I want to say like a decade and a half ago, to start these kinds of education programs for our young people so that it helps them figure out their Asian American identity and their heritage and history that is completely lacking in our schools. Other thing that we have is and speaking on that, we're part of the REACH Coalition. If you'd like to join that as an individual, perfectly, you can join that as well. We're trying to bring attention to a bill that Senator John Liu, supported by other New York State senators and assembly members throughout New York State, to push for legislation that will require the teaching of AANHPI education curriculum in our social study classes, K through 12. And if you want to learn more about that, you can talk to me. We also have the QR code back there to join the coalition, and we have dozens of organizations all throughout New York State, teachers, students, professors, everybody that's interested. We're mobilizing, and we're getting ready to have a Twitter storm or a media, all that stuff to make sure that people understand that this is super, super important, right? And I just want to end this last portion over here with the intros about talking about our 80/80 campaign. So 8080, what do those numbers mean, right? Because anywhere you see in our materials, you're going to see the 8080 campaign. What it is we want 80% voter registration rates, and we want 80% voter turnout rates, because right now it's hard enough to get it to 50%. Last year, in the 2022 midterm elections, for people, 30 and under, like 18 to 30, I think the average turnout rate for eligible voters was hovering around 30%, depending on who you ask and which statistics you use. But that was historically one of the highest turnouts, and that was actually able to do a lot of effect and change in terms of the political landscape. So, if we can get that number up to 80%, you're going to see a very different, landscape where your voices are better represented, right? If we're not voting, then we can't complain that the people representing us are not doing a certain type of job that we'd like them to do, because we're not the ones voting for them. Every single vote counts, right? And if anything, last year's midterm elections have proven that to be true. So I think we should move on to the next session, because look, I love talking. I ramble on and on and on. So I need people to be like, hey, Richard, dangle some keys over here. Next section. All right, so let's move on.
So, like Richard just talked to us about all of this, you guys can talk to Richard more after the event if you want. If you have any questions, if you want anything answered. But now we're going to turn to the other panelist up here, Ji-Won Kim. Like Richard said, she has acted as a coordinator, as an intern for CASE. So she's going to talk to us a little bit about her experiences working with CASE and what these two terms mean for her today, okay? So I want to transition into the two main questions of the day, but we're going to first start off with the word political empowerment. So Ji-Won Kim, to you, as a person who's worked with CASE over the years, what does political empowerment mean, and how can we understand it?
Well, thank you. So before I give my answer to your question, I just want to ask the question to the audience right over here. I want to know what you think political empowerment means when it pops into your mind.
Right. So I kind of want to end our panel discussion here today, so we can move on to questions, with a final question to Richard. And Richard, hopefully you don't go too much over time.
Oh, I'll go 3 hours.
Oh, God. Well, so the question is, how can we as young adults, besides the things that I just mentioned, how do you think that we can get involved in grassroots activism and the political scene in New York?
Okay, so that's a very good question, because the answer is multifaceted. The first and number one thing, and I think you guys are all doing that because you're here today, you got to get educated and you got to be informed, right? If you don't know what you're going to do, it's going to be hard for you to do the thing that you want to do, right? Like if you want to ride a bike but you don't know how to ride a bike, you can't just go on a 10-speeder and go down a hill. You're going to hurt yourself, right? Likewise, if you want to go help register people to vote, but you don't know what the rules are, right? Who's allowed to vote, where you're allowed to vote, or how you're supposed to vote. If you don't know any of those things, you're not going to be able to help anyone, right? So you got to be informed. You got to get educated. And things like this information, we live in an age where we have supercomputers in our pockets, right? These guys over here, we can figure out all the information. But the problem is now that there's just as much good information as there is bad information out there too. So that's the other part about being informed, right? You got to know how to sift through this information to figure out what's good information, what's bad information, right? What's true, what's false, and what's probably in the gray area that you need to do a little more research on to figure out the answer for yourself, right? Knowledge is powerful, but in order for you to wield it correctly, you need to use it in conjunction with your wisdom. And people tend to confuse the two. Knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing. They're very different things. Knowledge is the stuff that you know, and wisdom is how you apply it, right? So, when it comes to knowledge, you don't know what you don't know. So you can't ever find yourself in a position where you feel like you know everything, because chances are you probably don't know everything, right? Because that's more likely. There's just too much stuff in the world. It's not like you're gonna, you guys go to NYU, so I'm assuming all of you guys are crazy smart, right? It's hard to get into this school. I tried to get into this school. I couldn't get in. So look, I know you guys are already off to a better start than I did when I was your age, right? So. But the thing is, we all have bounds and gaps in our individual repertoire of knowledge, and it's important that we understand we collectively possess a wealth of knowledge, experience, and wisdom that can be shared, it can be exchanged, and it can be refined, that is, if we choose to do so, right? So you have to be reasonable. You got to be, and by that I mean you have to be able to be reasoned with, right? You have to reject violence, and you have to maintain civility. right? All of those things that require you to know things and to keep yourself informed and updated. I just have notes up here because I also have to keep myself knowledgeable and updated. So, after you've, established the knowledge and the wisdom portion, you need to, there's this other part, and I always say this is like 80 to 90% of the work. I made that stat up. You got to show up and you got to participate, because if you don't show up, you can't participate. And if you don't participate, you just wasted your time in showing up, right? But so everyone here has shown up. We've had several people in the audience already participate. You guys are already ahead of the curve, right? So, once you show up, you got to participate, right? It's a very big ask for a lot of people. It's really, really hard to do, right? The very basic act of showing up to a thing is hard enough. Then participating, it feels like it's even more. But the more you do it, the more you realize what it is that you find important that you need to show up for, right? And the thing is, you need to know, you have to practice showing up for the small things so that you're able to show up for the big things. Because if you can't show up to the small things, you're probably never going to show up for the big things, right? So, we got to make it a habit to understanding that the importance of showing up, because we can't become complacent or have apathy control us to the point where we don't show up to certain things that are important, right? Every single person that's here today, you've accomplished this affirmative task of showing up, right? Movements, political movements or any type of thing, it's not made in a vacuum. It's the people that do it, and you guys are the people. So I want to close with the last part of this little thing before we go into actually answering Ryan's question, is that you need to vote, right? You got to keep your electeds accountable. If you're an American citizen here, you should definitely make sure that you're voting in the primaries, because primaries determine the general election. People are saying, like, well, the primaries we're just picking the candidates, and it's not the real election. I'm like, no, it is the real election, because everyone complains during the general elections of who the candidates are, and we're like, I don't want to vote for either of these guys. But you had that chance of who's going to actually show up on the election day in the general elections in the primary. You get to pick the people, right? There's a whole bunch of people, and if there's a candidate you support, it's kind of on you to also let other people know, hey, this guy seems like a really good, or this woman that's running for council, or this man that's running for council, or whatever it is. Like, this person might really work for us, right? This person gets it. They're in the community. They understand the stuff, or whatever the reason is. But the thing is, if nobody advocates for them, no one's going to know about it, and the person's not going to win the primary. And then we're going to keep having the cycle where the same people keep, getting reelected, and us having the same kind of complaints about them, right? So the onus is on us, the people, right? And that's kind of what the whole grassroots thing is. It's not a grass top. We've gotten to a point in society where we feel like it's our electeds that need to tell us what to do, but it's really the other way around. It's us, the people, that put them in those positions that need to keep them accountable to their promises and their campaigns. So I'm circling back to what I said earlier. Last year in 2022, about roughly 30% of young persons, people in your age group, right, 18 to 30, about 30%, give or take. I don't know what the margin of error is on that, but that seems like a very small number. But that was enough to cause huge waves and turns in a lot of states. Even right now, as other primaries are coming in, more and more young people are showing up to the polls. Right, so every single one of you that is eligible to vote in this country, I urge you, please register to vote, show up to the polls, and show America what you guys are made of. Essentially, if 80% of you guys show up, if the voter registration rate goes and turnout rate goes from 30% to 80%, countrywide, essentially you guys will be running the country. You guys decide all the terms, right? You guys hold all the power. It's just somebody told you guys a lie that you guys don't have that power, but the truth is you guys hold all the power in this country. So I say register to vote, and vote for your ideals, the things that you care about. But again, remember, before you even get to that stage, you got to get educated. You got to be informed, because you got to be careful of who you're voting for, right? You got to know who you're voting for. You got to know what their ideals are. So that is the preface to all the volunteer opportunities that Ryan would like me to talk to you about. So I'm sure, who here is familiar with the NY's handshake system? Right, so I finally got approval through them to put an unpaid internship position for the summer. So I have 3 positions that are open that I put with NYU. So it'll just be working with us from June through August. Hours are negotiable. I don't want you guys exceeding more than 20 hours, because it is an internship, it is unpaid, and there's probably other things that you probably want to get done in the summer too. But if anyone here is interested in that kind of experience and working with a nonprofit and grassroots, and because we're doing a lot of stuff this summer. Last year, people thought I was doing a little too much for the org, and I was like, no, that's just a dry test run. We're doing a lot more this year. So, if you guys want to be alongside and work with that, definitely. I mean, we could always use volunteers for, individual events here and there. Like, I have like 4 different things up there in the back where you guys can sign up for different things. Like, one of them is the Collegiate Leadership Conference. If you want to hear more talks like this. Right, we're going to have like action plans. We're going to talk about what we can do on campus, like things like the Changemaker Center. These are resources that the school provides for you to help you grow and mature as responsible, people in this country. And there are other opportunities. Like next week, we're doing a voter registration drive at an adult daycare. It's mostly Korean speaking, so Korean speaking is preferred because otherwise you'll help us. You can help us set up, but then the rest of it you won't be able to communicate with any of the people that need help registering to vote, right? But we're collaborating with because I'm a lawyer. I'm part of the Korean American Lawyers Association, Greater New York. So some of those attorneys will be there too because they definitely have the heart to serve. It's just I did the whole lawyer thing, man. You're working like 80 to 90 hours a week. You just don't have time, but you have the heart to serve your community. And so these guys were able to find some time next week on Wednesday to go visit an adult daycare center. They're all, just like me, second-gen Korean Americans. We went through the grind. We did the law school thing. We got our jobs, and now we want to give back to our community, right? And what I'm trying to tell you is you don't have to wait until you get that big job to give back to your community. You can do it in small ways, big ways, and you can do it in your own way. But of course, I don't want you guys sacrificing your academics. That's super, super important. But part of the stuff that we're going to be talking about at the leadership conference is if all you do at a prestigious university like NYU is you just go to class, you don't make any friends, you just get like a bunch of A's and then you graduate and get a diploma, I'm really sorry, but you've wasted your time. There's so many resources here that you need to take advantage of. You need to make friends. You need to talk to your professors, like the office hours that your professors have. That's not punishment. That is a resource, right? You paid for it with your tuition. This is access to some of the most renowned people in the world at the top of their field, and you have access to them. This is what you're paying for. This is what you came here for. So you got to use it. You got to create that network for yourself because you have that network. You just got to like the other part, the second part, you got to show up, right, to use it. So these are kind of the things we're talking about, and it's not like we're just doing lectures and stuff. One of the things up there is we're just doing a fun mixer. We're doing like a media exchange, right? So we're going to be collecting some books or DVDs that you think other people would like, right? Obviously, you donate to us. Other people can call dibs on it, and that's fair. But the whole point is we have a mixer. We just have some food, have some drinks. I mean soda, and have a good time and with the community. I want more younger people to be involved because, like the professor was saying, there's a lot of young folks out here where we're so pressed for time, we're pressed for money that we just can't make time or can't afford to show up to these things. So I want to help create opportunities where you can experience not just working yourselves to death, but knowing how to come together for the fun things, right? We like for the past few years, the pandemic, the rise in the anti-Asian hate stuff. Like I'm exhausted of only showing up and gathering when terrible things happen, right? We gotta make sure that we also show up for celebrations. It can't just all be mourning and like being angry all the time. That's not healthy for any of us, right? So that's why we're having that mixer. That's why we're inviting people into our space so that we get into the habit of knowing that we need to show up for multiple different things, and it's not always about work, right? It's about humanity, for lack of a better word, right? We're people. We're social creatures. We're not robots, and even robots need tune-ups and maintenance and and breaks. So opportunities, because I feel Ryan glaring at me. I sense the rays. So we have the leadership conference, we have the mixer, we have an opportunity next week if you just want to dip your toes in helping out with voter registration drives, and we have that summer volunteer program. And before I forget, we also have a sign up if you care about Asian American, a Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander education in K through 12 in New York State. There is a coalition that we've been meeting every week for the past couple months. And we've individually been working on this separately all of last year and the year before, trying to get this legislation passed. And so now we've got all this momentum. The Senate bill number has been introduced. The Assembly bill number is going to be introduced any day. And we're going to have like joint press releases with these electeds along with our other orgs, and we're going to be doing a lot of stuff. So if you want to be part of that movement, if you want to contribute to it, and it doesn't just mean like you're good at researching. Maybe you're good at designing posters. Maybe you're good at showing up and like holding signs and saying we need this passed or whatever it is that you want to do. We're doing that. So just there's a QR code in the back. You can join the coalition. It's not just CASE. We have a whole bunch of other organizations that are co-leading this, and a lot of these people, surprisingly, are probably your age or maybe even younger. So you need to get in there and show up because this is important stuff, right? We're trying to get to that first thing where we're educating and we're keeping people informed, and then we're showing up, and then we're voting with our power, using all three things that I just talked about. So these opportunities exist. They're there for you, and if you need to talk to me about other stuff, definitely you can come up to me. You can ask me questions. I can give you my card, and I'm going to let Ryan talk because I feel like he feels ignored because I haven't given this back to me. You can talk.
No, that's all good. So he's supplying you guys all with valuable information, right? And I think this is all something that we all came here for. So there's internship opportunities, volunteer opportunities, ways for you to get involved. And much of what you said, Richard, is true. Showing up and participating, getting informed. And I know NYU is a very global institution, right? So some of you here are international students. So maybe your country doesn't have an option to vote. Maybe your country has barriers to voting or participating in politics. But I want to stress, and this is a theme, one of the themes for our presentation today, is that you can get informed and participate no matter what your country is. As a political participant, it doesn't take much, right? All you have to do is be informed, right? Which issues are the main issues, the talking points of our country today? How can I get involved, and how can I participate in making this a salient issue that we can talk about? That's step one. So I think if there's anything else you guys take away from this, right? On top of what Richard has already said, on top of what Jiwon has said, it's that you guys can politically empower your countries and become active, right? Become involved and sort of participate in your own political environment wherever you guys are. Okay? So that's it for us. Thank you guys for your undivided attention. I know that was a lot, but then I want to now open up the floor to you guys. If you guys have any questions or comments, none is fine. But if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand. Sure, Priscilla.
In the beginning, it was mentioned that the Korean community has their interests and concerns pertaining to their community. So I guess for anyone, like, how does that correlate to why they don't really participate in anything that has to do with the government? And could that be because the representatives that are in the government, they have no strong ties to the Asian community, period, so therefore they don't really know any interests and they don't really know any concerns that the Asian community or the Korean American community have as a whole. So I guess the first question is, how does that correlate to each other? And two, what advice would you give to Korean Americans, but just Asian Americans specifically, to not just participate, but also to emerge into having an actual role in the government and therefore being a representation for their people?
I feel like that's a question mainly for Richard, but I can
Sure.
give a short, sort of my version of an
Go
answer
ahead.
and then go into Richard's. I kind of want to answer the second part of your question, right? So I'm a Korean American. I was born in Florida, grew up here for 5 years, and then I went back to Korea. So my parents and family, they're in Korea. I was raised in an international school, and then I came back to New York to study here. And I feel like what I see as an outsider, right, as a Korean American who wasn't born here, who wasn't raised here, is that there's a lot of people like me who are like second generation, maybe even first generation Korean Americans who come to study, and they view America not with this kind of this intimacy that we have for Korea. And I feel like that's a little lacking here because, well, for one, the population of Korean Americans is smaller than those of other ethnic groups. But two, because of reasons for the relative recency of our immigration here too. So I feel like that's a part that we need to be involved in making sure that the Korean American community here has a stake, that they know that they should be involved with the government here and they should work for their empowerment here, instead of viewing America as a separate entity that's so far away from Korea that they don't care to participate. Well, at least that's my version of the answer. Richard, would you care to?
Sure. So this, I see the fairness in asking that question, and the thing is, before I joined CASE and I started showing up to these kinds of things, right, I probably had the same question. But having, shown up to a lot of these things, I realize, it's taken a few decades. Granted, it's been a very, very long time getting to here from where we used to be, right? The Chinese Exclusion Act is still a very recent thing where we still have people alive that were finally able to get into this country after the thing was repealed, right? It's not a ancient thing. It's very recent. But aside from that, where we are today in politics, right? I can name a few people in just focusing on New York State, like good friends that are not you wouldn't think of them as Asian community. Based on their own personal heritage and backgrounds, but people like Ed Bronstein or Toby Ann Stavisky or Gina Siliti, right? These don't sound like Korean names, but they're very out there and really advocating for the Asian American communities in the places that they are at. Now, it's not like I'm advocating. I'm not endorsing anyone or in particular. I'm just saying these people they show up, right? That's one of the main things. That's one of the things. When people show up, people notice. Right, and when I started showing up, I started noticing that a lot of these people that showed up to our things, like they showed up to our times that we're celebrating, times that we're mourning. They're there with the community, right? And I think that's super, super important because otherwise I would not have known, right? These would just be names on a wall or a piece of paper of who represents these communities, and that's not with me even talking about the AAPI. Electeds that are in city council or in the state assembly or the state senates, right? We have Senator John Liu, who's been in politics for such a long time that you can look for, I think CUNY had a closed circuit television thing from when he was much younger. Not that he's much older or anything like that. No, he's still very spry, very young guy. Because I'm being recorded now, I'm scared. But he's dang it. I want to say he's been doing this for a very long time, but then that might come into the whole next. I'm moving on.
Richard.
I'm getting flustered. But that you have my point. We've had people that it's been a slow and steady way to get there, but the Asian American community has had their representatives, and I'm not saying that the work is done, it's finished, we can pack up and go home. I'm just saying that we're finally getting some momentum where our community's concerns are being heard. Like last year, the whole Stop Asian Hate thing, that it wasn't just localized to the Asian American community. Other communities have been talking about that too and advocating for us, which is such a heartfelt, warming thing, knowing that other people are supporting our communities. Right, that we're actually, our concerns are actually being listened to. Granted, the violence still has not stopped, but there are advocates for us out there still working towards solutions. We have the White House having their ANHPI initiatives and their own task force working on different types of things. So, arguably speaking, one political side can argue that these are just tokens of trying to get garner votes, but other people can see these as opportunities where we can work towards advocating for our society and our communities and addressing the issues that we have. That whole visibility aspect, I think, is a super, super crucial thing because it helps with that first step I was talking about. People are getting informed. People are getting educated about the concerns that our community has. Right? We have the perpetual foreigner syndrome that a lot of people go through. That's why we're trying to undo that damage with our high school internship program. We have the model minority myth, which definitely hurts a lot of marginalized communities. Right? The term Asian American, it's a political term out of the '60s civil rights movement. Because obviously Asian American is, it's not obvious today, I guess. We identify as more of an ethnic thing than a political thing. But essentially you had, Chinese Americans, you have Vietnamese Koreans, Japanese Americans, whatever, but they were all different groups. But because their groups were so small, they didn't have that much, and I'm going back to the word of the day, political power, right, or empowerment, right? They did not have the political power. They were disenfranchised groups. And so they got a bunch of students. I forgot. I want to say this is West Coast. I'm forgetting the school. I should know this. I'm prepping for I always have to do a refresher on this.
I think it's California.
California. But anyway, like a whole bunch of students, they got together and they made the term Asian American so that you have an umbrella term where all these different marginalized communities can get together and have the optics of numbers, right? Because if you don't have enough numbers, your electeds are probably not going to pay attention to it, right? It's like you show up with like this community has only 10 people in it, the electeds are probably not going to listen to it. You show up and say we have 10,000 people, now they're going to start listening, right? 10,000 voters will put a big dent in their next election cycle, right? So this is how we communicate with our electeds when they're not listening to us. But once they start listening to us, once they become knowledgeable about the facts, right? They're not robots, they're human beings. We can talk to them about the things that their constituents are facing, the issues that their communities are facing. And I know that we don't have a perfect system. I know that it doesn't, just because we have that plan on paper, it doesn't go all that way. But that's not an excuse for us to give up. We got to keep trying. We got to do the second thing. We got to show up, right? We got to show up. We got to show the visuals, right? And then that third thing, we got to vote. We got to vote for our communities, right? So I hope that answered your question. I know I kind of speak around, but it's because that's how my brain works. Like it's not just like one thing. It's multiple factors that add into that answer, right? So I hope that was helpful.
Okay. Are there any other questions for?
I think you raised your hand, right?
You pretty much answered my question.
Okay, there we go. So that's also why I expand a little more because I feel like there might be follow-ups. So yeah.
Are there any questions for the other panelists, Jiwon, Kim? Sure.
It's like a question in general, I guess. How did you guys first come to like organize this organization? Because like you guys could have organized like a organization just for like Asian Americans in general, since there's more population of Asian Americans. But why specifically for like Korean Americans here?
Was that for her or was that for me?
Well,
Technically, she's been with Case longer than me.
So I guess
I mean,
yeah, you can answer this question.
I mean, I've never came to this organization. I was kind of born into this organization.
Just for your reference, her father is one of the founders of this organization.
And he's right behind all of you guys right there. So if you have any questions regarding like specifics of like the foundations of the organization, he's a better person to ask about. But so going back to your question about this being a Korean American specific organization, it really started off with the LA riots that Richard mentioned before, which erupted in 1992, and it's a combination of many different issues that were happening that were existing before. It was racial tensions between blacks, whites, and Koreans at the time. It was also about this economic disparity between Koreans and blacks at the time because they were in the same area. They were sharing the same space. So a lot of conflicts arise. And the LA riots became a thing where Korean Americans, this is not saying that the African American community were not disenfranchised by the situation, but as a Korean American, at the time, the Korean American community was also vandalized because of these rising tensions. And mostly we shifted the blame to the white-centric police department, which have close ties with the government. And one thing we realized is that we never really received any support, any aid from the police department at the time. And many of these police officers, they were actually safeguarding the borderline between where there was a huge Korean American community-based area along the borders to Beverly Hills, which tend to be extremely white populated. And one thing we realized is that a lot of these Korean Americans, despite being homeowners, being shop owners, and economically prosperous, and I think that applies to a lot of us to this day too. We weren't heard by the government, despite having that economic advantage, and so we realized, we were thinking, why are we being ignored? And the only reason came down to political activity, Korean Americans at the time, all they cared, I think this applies to many of us to this day too, is we only care about, how well off we are, how well off our families are. And so it becomes more individualized in terms of our concerns and interests. So we thought that it was important to have a Korean American centric organization so that we are able to advance these Korean American interests so they're being heard by the government, something that we lacked during the LA riots. Hence, we were victims of the LA riots as well. So I hope that answered your question. It's in order to advance Korean American interest from the past, where we really never really realized the importance of being active in the voting area.
And if I can just jump right in there. So I think another way to look at it is you have a lot of Korean Americans that immigrate to this country, right? And just like other types of immigrant groups, right, they come in waves, they settle in communities, and they tend to have little enclaves, right? Koreans with Koreans, you have your Chinatowns, you have your Italian neighborhoods, and so on and so forth. And so if you're kind of centralized in your own little enclaves, and I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, but chances are your language access might be somewhat inhibited, right? They probably, the people that immigrate here typically don't move automatically into the best neighborhoods with the best schools or anything like that. Their kids are struggling. I'm sure, they had, their children learned English, but the people that moved here, kind of very similar to my father. He also immigrated here to this country, in the I want to say the 80s or 90s, but no, definitely the 80s because I was born in the 80s. Yeah, he came in the 80s, so it's like right before the the uprising happened, but a lot of them don't have that language access, right? So that has a lot of multitude of issues. Number one, you want to try to connect with other communities. You can't speak the language. It's going to be really, really hard unless they came here knowing multiple languages. They're not going to be able to connect with those other communities that are marginalized, right? So that's the language access, the commonality, the fact that the early after the Chinese Exclusion Act, after the Korean War and all that stuff, like the Korean waves that came in here. Generally speaking, the only places where they can congregate, where they can see other people they can have a natural conversation with, aside from hello, welcome to my store, this is $5, right? As opposed to that, the only other place where they can have a natural conversation would be at religious institutions, kind of like church, Christian churches or Catholic churches or Buddhist temples or whatever it is that their faith or creed may be. These were the hot spots of where they would congregate. So most of these organizations, they probably started them out with people that they met at church, right? Or people that they knew, people they had regular conversations with, and when they're waiting for government aid and nothing is being done, they realize that something needs to happen, right? So that first step that I was talking about, the educating and being informed. If you don't have that language access, you don't know who to ask for help, right? You don't know who to if there even is a form. You might have come from a country where you just assume the government's just going to do it for you, but that's not the case with this country. You have to request the government for aid. If you don't request it, the aid will never come. And if I bring it down to the local level, let's say there's a pothole on the street. The city's not going to come in and fix it right away. Somebody has to call 311 and file a report. You have to tell the government what to do. They're not going to do it for you, right? And these are the kinds of unspoken rules of society and civics that you do not have access to if you don't have that language access, right? So to go back to your answer, your question about why why organizations like this would be more Korean-centered as opposed to Asian American-centered, based on my conversation before about the political title, it's because they don't have the language access to begin with, right? The Asian American political title, that was, again, done with students that had language access. They understood the system, and they organized because someone was there to teach them how to do it. But with these communities like this, no one had to. They had to start from scratch, right? The like case, it started from like a basement of an after school, and the thing is, like, you know, it's been 27 years, but it's amazing how they were able to pool their resources together. Like, it's not like they're running through grant money from the beginning. You know, these are all, this was started by a bunch of volunteers, people putting in their own savings to make sure that these programs are going, like civics classes, classes to help you naturalize, paths to you know, naturalization to become citizens, so then you can have the voting power, and then you can get into you know, get your foot into the door of the people that represent your district to tell them, hey, there's a group of people here that need a lot of help, but their concerns are not being listened to, either because they're not citizens, and they're just green card holders or whatever, or they lack language access or whatever it is. Like, there's a reason why some people don't vote, and part of that is the language access. And so that's one thing that KAVC, which is now CASE, work towards, to make sure they have that language access, right? It's not just CASE doing it by itself, and it's not an original idea. Other groups have been doing this too. And the thing is, by being able to, you know, to focus on the Korean American community, you have umbrella organizations that can work on bigger picture stuff, right? A different way for me to explain, to conceptualize this, because you know, every single one of you here are geniuses, and when it comes to economics, you know, there's macroeconomics and microeconomics, and they're very, very different things. So think of like CASE more like on the micro scale, right? Focusing in more like with a surgical scalpel for, you know, the Korean American community versus something like an Asian American flagship, you know, organization, which should deal with the more broader issues, right? The bigger stuff, right? So I hope that kind of answers that question. Again, and sorry for the long-windedness. Anybody else have questions?
I actually think we're out of time.
Oh, we
so,
are?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We thank you all for your attention and coming here. It means a lot, like showing up and listening and also participating in questions and answers. If you want.
Well, I first came here because I was friends with Jiwon and Ryan, and I've been to Case Gala last semester, and I had a pretty good experience. Like, I did not know that there was such an organization like that in New York, because I grew up in Connecticut. It's like a very small state with very little Korean American community population, so it was very shocking for me to go to like Case Gala and see all these like Korean Americans in New York trying to gather together for one single good cause, which is to like advocate for voting rights especially for Korean Americans, which was very surprising for me. And yes, I came here to like support my friends, but also it was really good to hear from like Richard and Jiwon's perspective, like as Korean Americans, since I'm not a Korean American, I immigrated to Korea, so it was really interesting to hear their perspective on how to make changes in America in comparison to my own perspective of how to make things better for like immigrants like me. So yeah, it was very interesting.
Hello, so my name is Ryan Lee. I'm a graduating senior studying politics and economics at the College of Arts and Sciences at New York University. One major motive for organizing this event was, I feel, the lack of political activism and knowledge among Korean American students here in NYU. So we actually have a lot of Korean students. The Korean student body is pretty large, but compared to other Asian American organizations, we don't really have an organization that advocates for political activism and participation. So when I met Jiwon in my junior year of college, I was introduced to her father's organization, CASE, and I realized that this was a real opportunity for CASE to be involved in college outreach, particularly in NYU, which is the largest school in New York City. And so I discussed with Jiwon about prospects to make this possible. A forum where we could invite other Korean Americans, even other Asian Americans, to learn about ways that they can get involved and participate in the political scene in New York, and also to get involved with CASE itself. Another reason is I always felt that CASE could use a little more help in terms of having more resources in college students. So we have a very robust relationship with high school students, but I feel like that relationship needs to be maintained throughout college, because that's really the formative years of a young person. It's when you get jobs, it's when you decide on a career path and what your worldview is going to be. And I feel like it's good for CASE to strengthen its ties to college students who are going to go out there and make a difference in the world. And so that's the reason why I'm very interested in this event.
My name is William Park. I'm studying applied psychology at NYU, and I'm a junior. I'm here in this event because of my friend is the panel and the moderator, so I'm just helping out setting up and cleaning up. And I've never been really involved in politics or, I moved to the United States before I was able to vote in Korea. But so I didn't really expect anything to learn something here. But I think the topic on political empowerment and how college students or normal ordinary people can be involved in politics, really everyday politics. I think I learned how I can be involved more. And simple things like showing up, being perceptive of my environment. So, I need to think more about this topic, but it wasn't helpful.
이름은 김지원이고요. 지금 현재 저는 뉴욕대에서 3학년이고요. 현재는 지금 정치학하고 동아시아 연구를 공부하고 있어요. 일단 이 이벤트를 저희가 개최하게 된 이유가 저희가 이 이벤트에 개최를 하게 된 이유가 저랑 같이 코호스트를 했던 그 라이언 리라는 학생과는 저희는 이제 오랫동안 한인이라는 정체성 갖고 이제 논의를 많이 한 적도 있었고 또 이제 저에게 참 좋은 리소스가 있는 이제 제가 인연이 깊은 케이스라는 시민참여센터라는 단체랑 있다 보니까 그 리소스를 활용하면 좋지 않을까 해서 더 많은 한인들이 이런 중요한 일에 참여도 하고 귀를 줄 수 있는 저희가 자리를 만들어주자 해서 어쩌다 보니까 학교 측에서 이런 체인지메이커 센터라는 곳에서 저희에게 이런 장소도 이렇게 빌려주게 해주시고 또 이제 어느 정도의 그러니까 도네이션이 아니고 펀딩을 해줘서 저희가 이제 음식도 제공을 할 수 있게 되었는데요. 저희가 그렇게 해서 이벤트를 개최를 할 수 있었어요. 많은 친구들이랑 이제 얘기를 하다 보니까 사실 저희는 한인 애들 위주가 많이 왔으면 하는 그런 마음이 있었는데 오히려 한인 애들보다는 더 다른 다양한 배경에서 온 친구들이 더 많이 왔었기 때문에 오히려 더 놀랐던 상황이긴 하지만 또 그만큼 저희가 또 이제 한인 커뮤니티에 대해서 많이 알리면 또 좋을 것 같은 기회여서 참 다행이라 여겼어요. 앞으로도 저희도 이런 이벤트를 많이 개최하려고 노력을 할 거예요. 아무래도 좀 한인 위주에 많이 그러니까 한인 학생들이 많이 관심을 주면 좋겠지만 다음 목표는 이제 한인 학생들을 많이 저희가 구성하기 위해 노력을 많이 해야 될 것 같아요. 앞으로도 이런 비슷한 이벤트 같은 걸 많이 개최할 것 같아요.